So for example, work by Rob Robinson and Lee Ross and others showing that people tend to exaggerate the degree to which other people are subject to ideological biases informing their political opinions. So in something like the abortion debate, people tend to think that people, especially those on the opposite side from them in the debate, are just, their whole opinion is just coming from ideology. It's not from their reasoning through the issue or thinking about the facts. It's just they had some ideological stance and that's driving everything. They especially believe that about those on the opposite side of the issue from them. They even believe it, though, about those on their same side of the issue. It's what they think is driving people to a great extent. Another example, people tend to exaggerate the role of self-interest bias in others. So this is a study done about the political issue of having a cigarette tax or increasing a cigarette tax. And what Miller and Ratner found was that people assumed that smokers would strongly oppose a cigarette tax because it goes against their financial self-interest, and the people who were non-smokers would think it was great because it doesn't go against their financial self-interest. And people, in fact, exaggerated the degree to which others would show this bias. So let me just show you a simple study that we did in starting all of this off, where we simply described to people various biases of the sort that psychologists have studied. And I'm not going to go into what each one of these is, but you can ask me about that later if you're interested. But these are just various classic biases. And what we found was when we had people read about them, and we said, to what extent do you show this? And we asked them to what extent other people showed it. For each one of these, people showed a significant tendency to think that other people showed it more than they themselves. For every single one of these biases. So, for example, the first one is the halo effect. That's to what extent when you know something positive about a person, like that they're attractive, for example, do you then maybe tend to think that they also have other positive qualities, like they're a helpful person or an intelligent person? People said, oh, I totally know people who do that. That's really common, but not so much me. And I should note that this is not simply an effect of people sort of denigrating the average American. So you get the same effect if people are comparing themselves to other students in a small seminar that they've been taking all semester, or in the good old days when you could go sit at the gate at the airport and ask people at the airport, what they thought of the other people sitting at that gate at the airport with them. You get this same effect. So now I want to talk about a different study. I've been telling you about this sort of general phenomenon whereby we see bias in others more than in the self, and I haven't really pinned myself down about what a bias is, and that's in part intentional because I'm thinking about it not so much in terms of a psychologist definition as what does a layperson tend to view as a bias. So maybe it's a departure from a normative standard or an objective criterion. Maybe it's just some sort of unwanted influence that even the person who was influenced by it would say, that's an inappropriate influence. I would not want to be influenced by that. So I'm going to, in this study, not talk about a really classic example of bias. I'm going to talk about something a little bit more related to ideology just because I'm at this conference. So this is a case where we had people read various alleged California propositions. So for those of you who live in California, and those of you who haven't as well, probably know that every year you're asked to vote on various propositions. And at least in my mind, having lived there, I felt that they often were either inscrutable or even strange. Like I remember voting on one about horse meat. And often you just don't know what position you're supposed to take on it. And so we thought that people would probably be very influenced by what they're told was the view of their party. So we had them read, for example, we made up a bunch of these that we thought had no clear partisan affiliation, such as a proposition to increase the maximum cargo size at the Port of Los Angeles. And then we just tacked on alleged partisan information. The Democrats support it, the Republicans oppose it. And then we had our participants write their thoughts about the issue. None of that was in red, of course. They just read about various of these propositions. They indicated all their thoughts about it, and then they said how they would vote. And we happened to know their partisan affiliation. We happened to know whether they identified as Democrat or Republican. So the first thing to note here is that people did show a strong bias towards just going with the party. So if they were Democrat, they tended to vote Democrat on the issues. Now, we also had another group of subjects in the study that I haven't told you about yet. They were observers. They read about all these issues, but they themselves did not vote on any of them. Instead, they read about the issue, and they saw how a subject, a voter, voted. So now they see this person's votes on each issue, and they see the person's thoughts about each issue, and they know what party that person is in. So they're like a fully informed observer. Now we asked both of these groups, the people who'd voted and the people who just observe people vote, we asked them whether a particular voter, every observer is linked to one voter. Did that voter, were they biased by their party? Did they, in particular, did they vote, were their votes influenced by the party that they belonged to? And what we found was that voters were less likely than observers to think that they had shown this bias. So there was a strong tendency to vote with the party. The voters didn't really think they had done it, though, whereas to observers, they sort of readily recognized that effect. So I want to talk now about a couple of reasons why that might occur. One might be just a simple self-enhancement kind of a motivation, right? It's sort of a negative thing to be biased. It's a negative thing to not think for yourself, form your own opinion about issues. So people might just not want to think that that influenced them. And in fact, we found across different studies that the more negative a bias is, the more likely people are to deny it. It's not that surprising. It doesn't account for nearly the full effect. So even things that aren't particularly negative, people still tend to think they haven't been influenced by them. Another explanation, something Dan talked about, naive realism. Now let's say you vote opposite from the way I do on increasing the maximum cargo size at the Port of LA. Well, now you're taking a different view than me to the extent that I think that I'm seeing things just as they are in objective reality. That is, I'm a naive realist. I assume the way I see it is the way that it is. Then if you see things differently from me, it must be something about you. Maybe it's that you're biased. So maybe it's this disagreement that's leading to these imputations of bias. And in fact, I'll show you a study later on showing that, yes, the more we disagree with people, the more we tend to view them as biased. Again, doesn't tell the whole story. Even when we don't disagree, we tend to see bias in others, which brings up a third account, and one that I'll focus a little bit more on today. And that has to do with the fact that bias tends to occur non-consciously. So to the extent that bias occurs non-consciously, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to deny it when you show it. It only means you're going to deny it when you show it if you're looking inwards for evidence of it. If you're looking to your behavior, it shouldn't matter whether it occurs consciously, not consciously. You look at what you've done. If it looks biased, you think you're biased. But that's not what people do. In the case of themselves, people introspect to try to gain self-understanding. So if I want to know what influenced my votes on a particular issue, I look inside and I say, well, what was I trying to have influence me? What did I feel influencing me? That's this idea of an introspection illusion. And the reason why I call it an illusion is that what we know from lots of psychology research in the past 20 years is that introspection isn't always such a great guide. It's an illusion that our introspections can be this wonderful tap into our mental processes. Another part of the illusion is that this is somehow uniquely true for us. That is that our introspections have this unique probative value, but other people's aren't so reliable. In their case, I'm better looking at behavior. So that's this idea, and I'll show you the next part of the voting study where we tested that.